Hi everyone, today we're looking at East Asia and the Indian Ocean world, roughly from the 1400s into the 1600s. We're stepping back just a little bit so we can have kind of a base as we move forward. The big idea that I want you to keep in mind is this. The world was already connected before Europeans became dominant in global trade. Europeans did not invent global exchange. They entered into an existing network that had already been developed and eventually fought to control them. Our main question today is this: how did trade and exchange help shape power in Asia and the Indian Ocean world? Trade was not just about buying and selling goods. Trade created wealth, and wealth created political power. Whoever controlled the important ports, routes, or choke points could collect taxes, attract merchants, and gain influence. Also, goods were not the only things moving. Ideas moved through these trade routes too. Religions, languages, artistic styles, technologies, and political ideas all traveled with merchants, sailors, and migrants. We'll look at three main ideas: India and its international connections, the Malacca Sultanate, and East Asia. India was a major hub in this connected world. Its location mattered. It linked Central Asia and the Middle East, Africa, and Southeast Asia. India was connected by both land and sea. Overland routes connected India with Central Asia and the Islamic world. Water routes connected Indian ports to the Red Sea, the Persian Gulf, East Africa, and Southeast Asia. So when we talk about India in this period, we shouldn't imagine at all that it's isolated. India was deeply involved in global exchange. Goods moved through India, but so did religions, art, technology, and cultural influence. One major power in India was the Mughal Empire. It was founded by Babur in northern India. The Mughals are important because their empire blended traditions. They were influenced by Persian culture, Islamic political traditions, and Indian society. This blending showed up in government, art, architecture, court life, and religion, basically every part of life in the empire. So the Mughal Empire gives us a good example of how political power and cultural exchange often work together. These empires didn't just conquer territory, they absorbed and reshaped ideas. Babur's son Humayun is a good example of this cultural blending. Humayun lost power for a time and took refuge with the Safavids in Persia. When he returned to India, he brought Persian court culture and artistic influence with him. That matters because it shows how political events could change culture. A ruler's exile was not just a personal setback. It helped bring new styles, new ideas, and influences into the Mughal court. In other words, political change shaped cultural change. Now let's shift to India's coast, especially Gujarat in western India. Gujarat was tied closely to Indian Ocean trade networks. Its merchants connected with the Red Sea, the Persian Gulf, East Africa, and Southeast Asia. This made Gujarat wealthy and strategically important. Coastal regions like this could become very powerful because they were plugged into international trade. But there's a catch. Wealth attracts attention. If a region becomes rich from trade, outsiders want to attract that wealth. That brings us to a major theme. Wealth attracts competition. Strong trade networks created immense wealth. Ports and trade routes could produce money, power, and political leverage. But that wealth made these areas targets. Outsiders wanted those profits. Internal rivalries could also make outsiders' influence easier. This is one of the patterns that we'll see again and again in world history. Powerful trade networks create opportunity, but they also create vulnerability. Next, let's look at the Malacca Sultanate. Malacca controlled the Straits of Malacca, one of the most important waterways in the world. This passage connected the Indian Ocean to East Asia. That made Malacca more than just a city, it was a global choke point. A choke point is a narrow passage that many people will have to use. If you control the choke point, you can influence trade, collect fees, and become extremely powerful. Malacca thrived because it was a safe and organized port for merchants. That may sound simple, but it was a big deal. Merchants wanted places where they could trade, store goods, and find protection while interacting with other traders. Malacca connected multiple trade routes in one place. It became cosmopolitan, meaning that many languages, religions, and cultures mixed there. The word cosmopolitan means having a world scope and being comfortable in many different cultures and environments. Malacca welcomed the diversity. This reminds us that trade cities were often very diverse cities. People from different backgrounds came together because business required them to do so. It required that contact. And when they did, big ideas, cultures, and traditions were exchanged. Trade creates diversity. Indian Ocean ports often hosted multi-ethnic communities. Merchants did not just exchange spices and textiles and porcelain or other precious goods. They exchanged ideas. Religions also spread along these trade routes. Languages mixed, customs changed, new communities formed. So when we study trade, we're not really just looking at economics, we're looking at the history of human contact. East Asia was also connected to global exchange, but governments often tried to control foreign influence. China, Korea, and Japan benefited from trade, but they did not always welcome outsiders freely. The issue wasn't necessarily trade itself. Trade could be useful. The concern was cultural disruption, religious influence, political instability, or conflict. So East Asian societies often tried to filter contact. They wanted the benefit of trade without losing the control. China, Korea, and Japan all participated in commerce, but they managed foreign contact differently. They controlled who entered, where trade could happen, and what ideas could spread. Foreign contact could bring useful goods and knowledge, but it could also bring missionaries, political pressure, violence, or even create internal conflict. So that's why governments often tried to regulate trade instead of simply opening the door completely. Here's the key takeaway. Being part of the same global trade system did not mean every society responded the same way. Indian Ocean societies often embraced exchange because their port cities depended on movement and diversity. Most East Asian societies often filtered contact more carefully. They still traded, but they tried to manage the risk. Same global system, different strategies. So let's pull this together. Asia was deeply connected long before European trade dominance. Trade created wealth, power, and cultural blending. Later, historical shifts were not about Europeans discovering a connected world. They were about Europeans entering existing networks and trying to control them. Different regions responded differently. Some embraced exchange openly, others tried to control it carefully. So the final point is this: the world was already connected. What changed later was simply who controlled those connections.